Hello and welcome to the Times of India. You're watching Global Pulse with me, Neha Khanna. For weeks now, the Trump administration in the United States has been attacking India over its purchase of Russian oil while accusing New Delhi of funding the Russian war machine and fueling the war in Ukraine. India has time and again made it crystal clear that it will do whatever it takes to serve its own national interest and it will not yield to any external pressure. Today, Prime Minister Narendra Modi said, no matter how much pressure is exerted, India will not compromise on its interests. Instead, it will continue to increase its strength to withstand the pressure. He added his government will let no harm come to India's farmers and small entrepreneurs. A clear reference to the US pressure vis-a-vis the trade deal and the new tariffs that are expected to come into effect this week. Over the weekend, India's ambassador to Russia sent out an unmistakable message to the United States, terming Trump's decision to impose secondary tariffs on India unfair, unreasonable and unjustified. Ambassador Vinay Kumar said Indian companies will continue buying oil from wherever they get the best deal, and New Delhi will continue taking measures that protect its national interests. In an interview with Russia's state-run TASS news agency, Kumar said India's priority is ensuring the energy security of the country's 1.4 billion people. Stressing that trade takes place on a commercial basis, the envoy said India's cooperation with Russia, as with several other countries, has helped to bring about stability in the global oil markets. Pointing out the double standards of the US, Ambassador Kumar said there are other countries, including the US itself and in Europe, that are trading with Russia. The Indian envoy's statement comes in the backdrop of the Trump administration imposing a staggering 50% tariffs on Indian imports. That's the highest for any country in the world. These include a punitive 25% tariff for buying Russian oil. The additional 25% tariffs, as we said, are expected to kick in on the 27th of August. The US argues that India's purchase of Russian oil is helping fund the war in Ukraine, a charge New Delhi vehemently denies. In recent days, key members of the Trump administration have made the most illogical and bizarre arguments to defend the penalty imposed on India. On Sunday, US Vice President J.D. Vance said Trump had announced secondary tariffs on India to apply aggressive economic leverage on Russia and force it to stop the war in Ukraine. In a television interview, Vance said Trump has applied aggressive economic leverage, for example, secondary tariffs on India, to try to make it harder for the Russians to get rich from their oil economy. Earlier, US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent and White House Trade Advisor Peter Navarro had accused India of profiteering from the Ukraine war. The absurdity of the argument is not lost on anyone in India. On Saturday, External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar called out the American hypocrisy in no uncertain terms. Responding to a question on the US criticism of India buying Russian oil, Jaishankar said, and I quote, "It's funny to have people who work for a pro-business American administration accusing other people of doing business. That's really curious. If you have a problem buying oil or refined products from India, don't buy it. Nobody forces you to buy it. But Europe buys, America buys. You don't like it? Don't buy it." The foreign minister also pointed out that the United States has not targeted China, the largest importer of Russian oil, or the European Union, the largest importer of Russian natural gas. He said India maintains strategic autonomy in its decision-making and would not be pressured into reducing oil imports from Russia. He argued when people say we are funding the war or putting money into the coffers of Russian President Vladimir Putin, Russia-EU trade is bigger than India-Russia trade. So is Europe not putting money into Putin's coffers? My point is there is a certain inconsistency here. While India maintains friendly ties with Ukraine, remember Russia is one of its most important allies. In recent months, ties between India and the United States have taken a massive hit on account of India's purchase of Russian oil. Sticking points in the stalled India-US trade deal and Trump's repeated claims of negotiating the ceasefire between India and Pakistan in the month of May during Operation Sindoor. Making some pretty candid remarks about the challenges of dealing with US President Donald Trump, Jaishankar said, "We've not had a US president who's conducted foreign policy as publicly as the current one. That itself is a departure, though it's not limited to India." Talking about Trump's repeated assertions about playing peacemaker between India and Pakistan, Jaishankar said, "For more than 50 years now, there is a national consensus in this country that we do not accept mediation in our relations with Pakistan." He said making phone calls is one thing, claiming mediation is quite another. Most in India believe it was New Delhi's refusal to give credit to Donald Trump for the ceasefire with Pakistan and to nominate him for a Nobel Peace Prize that angered the US president so much that he decided to burn the critical India-US relationship while throwing India under the bus with his tariff tyranny. Personal pique and his fragile ego, not only dictating the mercurial US president's trade and foreign policies, but destroying 3 decades of painstaking work to build the bilateral relationship between the two countries. Jaishankar also took a dig at Trump's growing closeness to Pakistan and its army chief Asim Munir. He said the United States and Pakistan have a history, and they have a history of overlooking that history. He reminded Washington that it was Pakistan that had sheltered Osama bin Laden, the world's most wanted terrorist and the architect of the 9/11 terror attacks, for a decade before he was hunted down by a US military team in Abbottabad near Pakistan's military headquarters in 2011. Indisputable facts conveniently ignored by Trump as he continues to try and arm twist and bully India in the hope that the latter will yield to his unreasonable demands. India has displayed zero signs of giving in. On the contrary, it continues to assert its strategic autonomy while holding a mirror up to the United States and its narcissistic president.
मैं आपको बार बार वादा करता हूं, मोदी के लिए आपके हित सर्वोपरि है। मेरी सरकार लघु उद्यमियों का, किसानों का, पशुपालकों का कभी भी अहित नहीं होने देंगी। दबाव कितना ही क्यों न आए, हम झेलने की अपनी ताकत बढ़ाते जाएंगे।
Look, it's funny that you have people who work for a pro-business American administration accusing other people of doing business. Okay, that's really curious. But here's the point. If you have a problem buying oil from India, oil or refined products, don't buy it. Nobody forced you to buy it. I mean, but Europe buys, America buys. So you don't like it, don't buy it. They have a history with each other, and they have a history of overlooking their history. So what happens is it's not the first time we've seen things. And the interesting thing is when you look sometimes at the certificates, say somebody in the military will give. It's the same military which went into Abbottabad and found who there.
All right. Some very interesting statements of defiance coming in there from India's top leadership. Let's discuss this with our panelists. Joining me on Global Pulse tonight is Scott N. Faulkner. He's former first chief administrative officer, the U.S. House of Representatives. Thanks so much, Mr. Faulkner, for joining me on Global Pulse. We also have with us Fred Weir. He's a journalist and political commentator and joins us live from Moscow. And completing the panel tonight is Dr. Abhinav Pandya, CEO of USANA's Foundation. Thanks very much to all of you for joining me. Scott Faulkner, if I could begin with you. I don't think I even need to tell you about the kind of cantankerous and downright hostile statements that have come from key members of the Trump cabinet in the last few days, repeatedly targeting India. What do you make of India's response? It's one of defiance, one that is repeatedly asserting its strategic autonomy, and one that suggests that we are in no mood to yield to Donald Trump's bullying. You heard the Prime Minister of India there saying, we will not compromise no matter how much external pressure is applied. And then there is India's Foreign Minister S. Jaishankar, who in a very interesting fashion actually called out American hypocrisy over the weekend, saying, you don't like it, don't buy it. But you know what? Europe continues to buy refined oil from India, as does the United States of America, which is hell-bent on punishing tariffs. What do you make of this?
It's very perplexing because India is obviously the largest population in the world. It is the largest democracy in the world. If you remove the two thugs in China and Moscow, it is clearly the single most important country in the world past the United States. So to have a falling out between the US and India is really, it's sad on so many fronts. And it makes no sense. I mean, Trump almost bent over backwards to elevate Putin into the world stage at a time when Putin was already a pariah. And it took all the US allies in Europe and Ukraine coming to the White House to kind of level the playing field again. And so it's really sad that this economic warfare, which is starting to occur between the US and India, is harming one of the most important, if not the most important, not only trade, but political relationships in the world today. It just makes no sense at all to me.
It makes no sense, but I wish Donald Trump understood that. I wish there were people in his administration with a spine who would tell him that. Dr. Abhinav Pandya, let me bring you into the conversation. I found it absolutely fascinating that, Dr. Jaishankar pointed out American hypocrisy over the weekend when asked about the repeated tirade being launched by the Trump administration against India and the Trump tariffs. He said it's funny to have people who work for a pro-business American administration accusing other people of doing business, considering that many members of the Trump cabinet have accused India of profiteering from the Ukraine war. And he says, if you have a problem buying oil or refined products from India, don't buy it. Nobody's forcing you to buy it. But Europe buys it, America buys it. You don't like it, don't buy it. You've also heard what the Prime Minister has said today, saying no matter what, we're not going to give in to pressure and we will not let any harm come to the Indian farmers and small entrepreneurs. A clear reference to the pressure that's coming in from the Trump administration for India to make certain concessions in the negotiations on the trade deal between India and the United States, which is obviously stalled at the moment. What do you make of these statements of defiance that have come in from New Delhi?
I feel that from both the sides, I guess the passions are really running high. But if you look at the nuances, I don't think this is really about the Indian purchasing oil from Russia. It seems that Trump's eccentricities and ego have taken the center stage, completely bypassing the logic of geoeconomics and geopolitics. And duplicity is already out in the open. If you look at the US, between Jan and May 2025, Americans have bought around $596 million of uranium from Russia. And guess who is the largest buyer of Russian gas? It's the EU. And guess who's the largest buyer of Russian crude oil? It's China. 47% of Russian crude oil exports are going to China, followed by India. And then EU is also buying 6%. Turkey is also buying 6%. And, and let me come to the exemptions which EU is giving in this case. You have this, even the crude oil pipeline running, that southern Druzhba pipeline from Hungary, Slovakia, still running. Sakhalin pipeline, supplying the Russian crude oil through naval shipments to Japan is still continuing. So I don't think this is really about India buying Russian crude. And if you look at the past, Americans have lauded Indian efforts of buying Russian oil and keeping the prices stable. Eric Garcetti praised India. Also, the former Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen praised India's efforts in buying Russian oil. And in 2022, when the Ukraine war started, prices soared up to $137 per US dollars per barrel. If India had not continued buying Russian oil, prices would have gone beyond $200 per barrel. So I guess, it's a clear case of duplicity. India has contributed to maintaining smooth supply lines, energy chains, and keeping the prices stable and markets balanced. And what US is doing right now, that's completely a U-turn. And it seems that, Donald Trump is up to completely squander away the efforts of last 2 decades in building a robust India-US partnership.
Well, certainly he has taken a wrecking ball to the India-US relationship. I don't think anybody can dispute that anymore. Fred Weir, let me bring you in here. It's the hypocrisy which is absolutely staggering, and India is making no bones about it. While the Trump administration accuses India of profiteering from the Ukraine war, having a role in the bloodshed, of fueling Russia's war machine, of keeping the war going, they have no answers to questions that are being raised by India. For instance, why is America buying refined oil from India if it has such a huge problem with it? Why is the European Union buying refined oil from India if they have such a big problem with it? Dr. Jaishankar says, they are accusing India of putting money into Putin's coffers. Now, when EU does business with Russia and their trade is bigger than India-Russia trade, is Europe not putting money into Putin's coffers? Also, it is Putin, no less, who said at the recent Alaska summit in a joint press conference with President Trump that US-Russia trade has gone up by 20% since Donald Trump came back into office earlier this year. And the same Donald Trump is hell-bent on punishing India for buying Russian oil.
Well, look, these targeted geopolitical tariffs are just the most ill-considered thing I've seen. It's not only India. Brazil is being threatened over its own internal judicial processes, and Canada has been threatened because it wants to, or has indicated that it will recognize a Palestinian state. These are political goals attached to economic threats. And I'm a Canadian, and I can tell you that not Canada, which is one of the closest allies and friends of the United States. I grew up, within a few miles of the U.S. border, and we used to go freely across that border, feel at home. Canada hardly ever even criticizes the United States, and yet we're going to defy that threat. That's a very un-Canadian thing, but there it is. And I have a lot of friends who are just in fury over this. They're not political. They're pro-American people, nice Canadians, and yet this has got them angrier and more offended than I've seen Canadians in a long time. It's not just that threat, but so it's incredibly counterproductive. And even for Trump, who is rather ham-handed politician, and he's smasher and grabber, but this is something that they really need to reconsider. As for the Russia and the tariffs on India, I think the Russians have said almost nothing about it. There's very little they could say, of course, but underneath, I mean, they're sympathetic, but Russia itself is the most sanctioned country on earth. So it's a sort of welcome to the club response, maybe. But if you wanted a U.S. president who was deliberately thinking up ways to drive the BRICS group from a sort of vague talking shop into a serious economic alliance, you wouldn't do better than the stuff that Donald Trump is coming up with. Obviously, if India defies these threats, as any self-respecting country would do, then it's got to start looking for alternatives. And the alternatives are right there. The global south, countries like Russia, and where India might wish to keep a distance, this is going to drive them closer. I think we see that signs of that happening already. So this Trumpian technique, it's like comic opera imperialism. It just as if you can direct other people's foreign policies by pushing a threat button. It's just one of the most peculiar things I've ever seen.
I think we can all agree with that. Perhaps it's the most peculiar thing that any of us have seen in a really long time. Many are calling it imperialism and neo-colonialism. Let me take this back to Scott Faulkner. Scott Faulkner, a U.S. trade delegation was scheduled to visit India on the 25th of this month to take the trade negotiations forward. That visit has been called off. The second set of 25% punitive tariffs imposed by the Trump administration on New Delhi for buying Russian oil are expected to kick in 2 days from now, on the 27th of August. How do you really see this panning out? Because I think it would be an understatement to say that Donald Trump has inflicted enormous damage on the India-US relationship. Do you see the relationship coming back from this anytime in the foreseeable future? Also, it's very interesting you refer to Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin as thugs. Now, whether you like it or not, fact of the matter is that Donald Trump, by bullying India, seems to have only pushed India into a closer embrace of Russia and China.
It's going to be interesting as we move, as Congress, right now in America, our government's basically on vacation, at least on our congressional branches. And Trump just named one of his closest inner circle people to be the ambassador to India. He currently runs our presidential personnel operation, which is oversees appointing presidential appointees and political appointees within the Trump administration. He has no foreign policy background, but he is a Trump intimate. And it'll be interesting to see when Congress comes back into session next week as to the confirmation hearings that'll take place for the new U.S. ambassador to India, and whether people are going to raise the issues you're raising in a substantive enough way to draw out the Trump administration of what are they really up to? Because you're right, as are the other speakers on this panel, that it doesn't make any sense. I mean, if Trump really wants to crush Russia, he could do it very easily. Russia has a shadow fleet of 75 oil tankers that represent about 35% of Russia's overseas revenue in terms of oil revenue. He could be interdicting those ships. He could be either sinking them or capturing them or sealing them into ports that are friendly to the United States. And that would cripple Russia more than anything else. So these secondary tariffs, these other issues that are basically, as you're mentioning, driving India, a wedge between India and the US, and India and the BRICS from the US, none of it makes any sense. And hopefully some of this will come out in what will hopefully be very enlightening hearings when the U.S. ambassador goes up to the Senate for confirmation.
Okay, you make some interesting points there. I don't know if the Trump administration is interdicting Russia's shadow fleet ships, but what Trump is definitely doing is to roll out the red carpet for Vladimir Putin. We know what happened in the Alaska summit that ended Putin's isolation by the West. It granted him legitimacy and validation on a global stage. And what Trump is also now pushing for is an improved relationship between Russia and the United States, and all this while hypocritically he punishes India for having a long-standing relationship with Russia. I don't think it gets more hypocritical than this, and it doesn't get more illogical than this. But let me bring in Dr. Abhinav Pandya at this point. Dr. Pandya, Scott Faulkner made that interesting point about a very significant appointment that has been made by the Trump administration. Sergio Gore is going to be India's next ambassador, I beg your pardon, the United States' next ambassador to India, subject to approval from the US Congress. Now, there have been very mixed reactions in India to this appointment. There is no doubt that he is considered to be part of Donald Trump's inner circle. Many see him as a hardcore MAGA loyalist. But people don't know what to make of this announcement at a time like this because Trump is being so hostile to India. Is it meant to signal that he wants a thaw in the frostiness, he wants to improve ties between the two countries? Or is Sergio Gore a man who is essentially being sent to New Delhi to enforce Donald Trump's diktats? Also, there is a lot of curiosity and ambivalence around the fact that he has been given the dual role of US ambassador to India as well as a special envoy for Central Asia. I wonder what you make of that.
Oh, well, given that America is hostile to India right now, particularly Donald Trump, so I will not say that Mr. Sergio Gore, Trump's confidant, is going to be very pro-India. But yes, sending someone who has been closely associated with Donald Trump and allegedly published some of his best-selling books, managed his campaign as ambassador to India, shows that India is really important in the American strategic calculus now. And also the fact that Delhi is seen as some kind of an epicenter to handle South Asian and Central Asian geopolitics also shows that India's geopolitical stature has really increased, and it's important. Now, whether it's positive for India or bad or negative for India, that's something which only future will tell. But given what situation is going on right now, that is like an estrangement between India and the US, it seems that the India-US relationship is heading for tough times. And also, Mr. Sergio Gore's appointment has to be seen in the context of the US warming up to Pakistan. As we all know that recently US has signed some sort of a deal with Pakistan. It's a major crypto deal which has been signed with an American firm linked to Donald Trump's family. And General Asim Munir has been hosted for a lunch by Donald Trump. Recently, we had a conflict with Pakistan. So, I mean, some larger geopolitical overtones.
Okay, let me take this to Fred Weir. Fred Weir, just for the benefit of our viewers, let me mention here that Sergio Gore, the man who is said to be the next US ambassador to India, has been described by Elon Musk as a snake in the past. Of course, we know that Elon Musk is no longer best friends with Donald Trump. But coming here, you know, there is a lot of, what shall I say, ambivalence in India about this appointment. People don't quite know what to make of it. Like I said, it comes at a time when Trump is being extraordinarily hostile to India. Yes, this is a man who is part of Trump's inner circle, but there are many who are wondering if he's being sent to essentially enforce Trump's diktat rather than to improve the India-US relationship, which is under considerable strain right now. Also, a lot of people are sort of offended by the fact that Sergio Gore has been given another role, that of US Special Envoy for South and Central Asian affairs, because the concern in New Delhi is that this could lead to a rehyphenation between India and Pakistan, something that New Delhi strongly detests, something that in a sense we had moved away from over the years.
Well, this is not something that I normally can speak to. The ambassador who is in the American system is appointed by the president, is usually done. I mean, it's very common to have political appointments. We often have had them here in Moscow. And the ambassador's job beyond all the usual diplomatic functions and standard ones is to represent the president, to enforce his policies. So I guess that is the case. But I would like to point out that any attack on a ship at sea under the law of the sea is either an act of piracy or an act of war. It's not surprising that Russian ships, or even if they carry other flags, are not being interdicted on the high seas, because one of the great dangers of the Ukraine war so far has been at various moments that it could spill into World War III, something that we should all fervently wish to avoid. So I sort of, though I have to carry no brief for Donald Trump, I have watched this process of normalizing, or to some extent normalizing, relations with Russia with positive feelings, because it is so abnormal that the two greatest nuclear powers, nuclear armed countries in the world, have had virtually no channels of communication open for almost a decade, but particularly the last 3 years. I know because I work for an American newspaper, and I have contacts with the U.S. Embassy regularly. They are operating on a skeleton staff. They conduct no consular functions whatsoever, and they're struggling just to carry out their normal diplomatic jobs because they're understaffed, isolated. This is not normal, and the process of just restoring those channels is critically important. And anyway, I welcome it. And even if more things like airline connections or postal connections, for heaven's sake, I'm a Canadian, as I said, I can't send a letter to Canada from Russia because there's no contact between post offices. This is just not normal, even though Russia's at war in Ukraine, and this is a concern of global dimensions. It doesn't help the isolation, the alienation, the demonization that has been going on for the past 3 years has not made anything better. And Trump, in his own blundering way, is moving toward at least what could be a better situation.
Okay, you welcome the recent developments. I think going by what we saw, the camaraderie that we saw on display in Alaska, I think it is quite evident that Donald Trump is keen on improving the United States' relationship with Russia. We also saw Putin saying next time we're going to meet in Moscow, and Trump saying, I may get heat for it, but that is something that we can do. I can tell you one thing, Mr. Veer, that nobody in India is complaining about Trump trying to improve relations with Putin. However, all we are saying is, for God's sake, stop singling us out for doing business with a country that we have a long-standing relationship with. Let me take this back to Scott Faulkner. Scott Faulkner, since you brought up the issue of Sergio Gore, being handpicked by Trump as his envoy to India. How significant do you believe this appointment is? Because like I said, in India, there have been mixed reactions to this announcement. Many also are not happy about the fact that Sergio Gore will also be the US Special Envoy for South and Central Asian Affairs, because like I said earlier, there is a fear that this might be an attempt on part of the Trump administration to rehyphenate India and Pakistan, something that New Delhi absolutely loathes, especially in view of the fact that Trump has been cozying up to terror state Pakistan and its army chief Asim Munir.
I totally agree that the issue here is that when you have someone this close to Trump coming into a major diplomatic post and then carrying this other portfolio, there's clearly wheels turning that are not fully understood or even fully divulged to the world. And that again is why it's so critical that these confirmation hearings coming up, and hopefully this ambassador designate will also go and make himself available to the media, that people need to ask some very strong, pointed questions about what his portfolio is, what his goals are, because his goals are Trump's goals are America's goals, at least for the next 4 years. And therefore, we need to know more about this. Again, this is an individual who, while literally in Trump's inner circle, has no diplomatic experience whatsoever. So therefore, he's there pretty much as a direct line to Trump. And what does that really mean is something we can speculate. But until senators in the U.S. Senate ask him pointed questions, until some of the U.S. and international media ask him pointed questions, we really don't know, is this a good thing or a bad thing ultimately for India and the subcontinent?
I can tell you that there is a very high degree of consternation around this. Nobody really seems to know what to make of it at this point in time, thanks to Donald Trump's brazen hostility towards India. Before I take this back to the Indian guest, Mr. Faulkner, I want to ask you a follow-up question. Like I mentioned earlier, over the weekend, India's External Affairs Minister, Dr. S. Jaishankar, made some pretty candid remarks calling out American hypocrisy over multiple issues, especially with regard to Russian oil and Trump tariffs. He also had something very interesting to say about the growing closeness between Trump and Pakistan. He said, the United States and Pakistan have a history, and they have a history of overlooking that history. And then he says, we all know when the U.S. military team went hunting for Osama bin Laden. In 2011, they found him hiding in Abbottabad near Pakistan's military headquarters. The whole world knows that Pakistan is the country that was sheltering the world's most wanted terrorists and the architect of the 9/11 terror attacks, the worst terror attacks on American soil. Why is it that successive American administrations seem to have turned a blind eye to this fact, and none more than the current president, who is going out of his way to reward the terror state of Pakistan?
Well, you have to go back further into history. At the height of the Cold War, Pakistan was the back channel for the United States to open their dialogue with China. And of course, Nixon's trip to China, which at that time they were trying to look at triangulation between Russia, at that time the Soviet Union, China, and the United States. And Pakistan was the kind of the go-between that opened that door. And then during the height of the Afghanistan insurgency against the Soviet occupation, Pakistan was the avenue for weapons and money and expertise to go in to help Mujahideen and the Northern Alliance against the Soviet occupation of Afghanistan. So people are looking at those aspects, but then again, as you say, they harbored bin Laden. Pakistan has launched some horrific terrorist attacks, like in Mumbai many years ago, and so so I can see where on one front there's probably a pro-Pakistan faction within our national security complex within the United States because of the opening to China under Nixon and the toppling of the Soviet occupation of Afghanistan, and mostly under Reagan. And so that's probably part of this. But again, that's the past. The current situation is that Pakistan is close to Iran, close to China, close to fueling terrorism up in the Kashmir. And again, they still have never been held accountable fully for the Mumbai attack many years ago. So it's perplexing to see Pakistani players coming into Washington and being feted, in addition to at a time when India should be the one that is really in the center stage.
Well, yes, absolutely. This is a question that everyone in India has been asking ever since Asim Munir was hosted for a lunch at the White House by President Trump. He was almost treated as a state guest. And this happened just weeks after the horrific Pahalgam terror attack in India, which led to a 100-day military conflict between the two nuclear-armed neighbors. Let me bring in Dr. Abhinav Pandya at this point. Dr. Abhinav Pandya, a lot has been said about Trump cozying up to Pakistan and its army chief Asim Munir. We heard what Dr. Jaishankar said over the weekend about the two countries having a long history and often overlooking that history. But there are many who believe that the growing closeness that you see between Trump and Asim Munir has more to do with Trump's own vested financial interest in Pakistan, in the Crypto Council in particular, than anything else.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Yes. So I guess, before asking your question, the current question, I just want to make a very brief remark regarding the previous topic, the Sergio Gore's appointment,
Sure.
and the ambivalence that's present in India. So he's not a career diplomat. He is a Trump's confidant. And generally in India, we have the tradition of sending career diplomats who are appointed as a diplomat after passing through an examination. So generally, career diplomats tend to be status quoist, and they sort of signify continuity. But when you send a special person as an ambassador to some country, that means you have some special agenda, some special roadmap, some action plan for that country. So I guess his appointment needs to be seen in that context. And clubbing together Central Asia and South Asia again shows that the geography of Central Asia is going to be very critical to the US now. Previously, it used to be Afghanistan, and now if something is happening in Central Asia, Pakistan will be like one of the key proxies of the US. That's what it shows right now. So this whole thing has to be seen in that context also. Now, coming to your present question, well, the US-Pakistan relationship is very old. And like even during the Cold War, as my previous speaker, my co-panelist Scott Faulkner said, that Pakistan was a back channel to American outreach to China. Even during the global war on terror, Pakistan continued supporting Taliban and all kinds of jihadists in Afghanistan and Kashmir. And Americans knew about it. But then also Americans kept supplying Pakistan with a lot of military aid and civilian aid. So that friendship, in a way, continues. There's a very natural bonding between the US Army and Pakistan Army. Now, coming to the Trump's personal economic interests, certainly they are there, and we came to know about the deal which was signed with the firm linked to Trump's family. So those personal interests, be it in Balochistan or be it about critical minerals or about the crypto deal, they're certainly there, and Pak Army can do that job very well. It's a mercenary army which has done the dirty job for all kinds of global powers in the past. Even now, Pak Army faces a lot of opposition in the country. They have separatist movements. Asim Munir is very unpopular in the country. So now, in order to bolster and strengthen his position within Pakistan, he needs global powers on his side. And he has realized over the last few years that the benefactors like the Americans cannot replace China. They have great ties with China, but Americans I mean, they cannot, Chinese cannot match Americans when it comes to supplying military and civilian aid. Along with that, Trump's personal interests are certainly going to bolster and strengthen this Pak-US axis, and India should really be alarmed with that.
I guess India is alarmed and deeply offended by it, for sure. You know, whether it's his financial interests that are driving his closeness to Pakistan, or the so-called critical mineral deposits and oil reserves that Trump has suddenly discovered in Pakistan, which even the people of Pakistan were apparently not aware of. But as I wrap up this discussion, Tredveer, I will give you the last word. Since you brought up BRICS earlier, I'm going to ask you this. Last week, India's foreign minister was in Moscow. He met with President Putin and his counterpart. There are reports that suggest that President Putin is going to be in India later this year for the annual Russia-India summit. The Chinese foreign minister also visited New Delhi last week, and the Indian Prime Minister, Dr. Narendra Modi, is going to be in China for the SCO summit at the end of this month. Do you believe that with his bullying tactics, Trump has ironically pushed India much closer to China and Russia? Do you believe he's also, unintentionally infused fresh life into BRICS? And what do you think about the construct of the RIC axis?
Well, look, yes, I mean, Russia has, under Putin, has tried to pursue a multi-vector foreign policy. They have being friends with Palestinians and Israelis, being friends with India and Pakistan and China, being everybody's friend. And sometimes that does not work out, as you see with Israeli-Russian relations now collapsing. And there was a lot of potential with the Ukraine war for wise diplomacy in the West, and particularly Washington, to pull some of these countries, even India, where I know you're not happy with Russia's behavior in Ukraine. And there were so many good diplomatic opportunities, and the Biden administration largely flubbed them, did not perform very well or very subtly. Russia has a long relationship with India, and Russian diplomats know how to talk with India, how to respect India's long-standing foreign policy priorities. I know my own mother-in-law is one of the top Russian experts on India and an advisor to the Russian government. I know this from her firsthand, how tremendously respectful and how they interact with their Indian counterparts so carefully all the time. And always, whenever a Russian leader is going to India or vice versa, they're called in to give advice. So Russia knows how to do this, and they act strategically. The United States has never gotten it right, in part because they do have these politically appointed ambassadors, and each president has his own agenda. But all I can say is that this behavior on the part of the Trump administration is definitely driving the development of the BRICS, which was already somewhat of a going concern under Biden. Biden didn't help with relations with the global South and even India, but Trump is messing it up big time and very fast.
He's messing it up big time and very fast. Again, ironical. I can't stop using that word, because here's a US president who keeps berating BRICS, calling it an anti-America alliance, accusing it of standing for nothing but de-dollarization. He's punishing India for doing business with Russia. And through his bullying tactics, all he's managed to do is to damage the India-US relationship and drive India closer to Russia as well as China. We'll have to wait and see how things unfold over the next few days and weeks. As we said, those punitive tariffs of 25% are in fact likely to kick in 2 days from now. How will that pan out for the India-US relationship will remain a big question. On that note, Scott Faulkner, Fred Weir, and Abhinav Pandya, thanks to all of you for joining me on Global Pulse tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, that's all the time we have on this edition of Global Pulse. If you have been, thanks so much for watching. But do remember, Prime Minister Narendra Modi will be headed to China very soon to attend the SCO summit. That's a story we're going to track very closely here on Global Pulse. Stay tuned.